My name is Palvashan Abbas, and I am working as project executive at Center for Global and Strategic Studies, Islamabad, on behalf of CGSS and the Embassy of the Republic of Indonesia. I would like to welcome our today's guest speaker, Professor Dinna, representatives from the Indonesian Embassy, and all the participants who joined us today. Our today's speaker, Dr. Dinna, she's a lecturer of BINUS University from Jakarta. Professor Dinna will be discussing Indonesian foreign policy, regionalism, and global security challenges. So thank you, Dr. Dinna, for joining us today, and I welcome you to our today's session. Now, you're kindly requested to please address our candidates.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Happy Ramadan to everybody who is now doing the fasting for the first day. Excellency Adam, how are you? Thank you very much for the invitation, and also to the Center for Global and Strategic Studies. It is my honor to be able to address you today and discuss about Indonesia's foreign policy. I sure hope that all will went well throughout the connection and everything will be fine. As a start, the background of my Zoom is one of the beach in Indonesia that I just visited last week. It's in Manado. Not many people know that outside of Bali, there are also other beautiful beaches that is accessible to people. All right, let me do the screen sharing, and also I do my timer here. So the goal of my session today is to discuss about Indonesia's foreign policy. I really hope that through this session, I can inform you about the logic of Indonesia's foreign policy, in particular in regional cooperation and political security issues. Somehow we have to take one angle to go a little bit in depth, and then I also encourage us to discuss today some of the contemporary political security challenges at the regional and global levels. So in doing so, I will discuss three aspects. The first one is the Indonesia and the framework of regional political security cooperation, and then the regional political security challenges, and how we can then inspire global responses. I understand from Excellency Adam that some of you are master graduates, while some of you already have PhDs. So it could be a challenging thing to make sure that I satisfy everybody's curiosity. But let's just start with this. One of the things that I truly believe is that foreign policy always starts at home. And by doing so, I would like to highlight that Indonesia as a country, be it aware that the global stage is very much about contestation of power, Indonesia is always interested in advancing peace and to remain independent in making its foreign policy. So it's very clear that Indonesia would never want to be an ally to any powers in the world. There are many reasons for that. And the 5 issues that I mentioned in my presentation is only some of them, but they are the critical aspects that make Indonesia interested in peace and also in being independent. Number 1, location of Indonesia. So if you look at Indonesia, compare it with any other countries in the world, Indonesia is literally in the world's crossroads. If you notice, Indonesia is not only the intersection of various kinds of vessels passing by, airplanes passing by, trade, human beings, and many kinds of economic as well as political and also illegal activities passing by through this area. So by nature, Indonesia will always be open. And the intent of Indonesia to make sure that Indonesia is connected to the world is also seen in its recognition of sea lanes of communication. Indonesia has 3 sea lanes of communication, and it has branches as well. If you are not aware of sea lanes of communication, it's basically you know, the lanes in the world that is considered international waters. So people can pass by, even though it's territorial water of Indonesia, you can pass by through this red lines, and you know, basically for any kinds of activities. So again, by location, Indonesia is open. Of course, you cannot imagine being in a crossroad and being close-minded. Somehow you have to be able to engage with any kinds of people from different kind of segments in the world. Second of all, Indonesia is a very big country. It's a vast country from the east to the west, and it has 3 time zones. And not only that, the human beings in this country is very diverse. Thousands of ethnic groups, not to mention the dialects, the languages, the religions that people adhere to. So basically, you cannot impose any uniform mindset in Indonesia. It's just the nature. And because of this situation, also because of the geographical diversity, you know, different kinds of variations on topography, there are uneven structural problems across Indonesia. We can always discuss about it later on, but that's one thing. So challenge after challenge is something that Indonesia has to overcome domestically. The third aspect is history. So if you look at the history of Indonesia, Indonesia and Pakistan share common history of colonialism. And we are against colonialism, imperialism. And insurgents inside of the country is also one of the challenge that a country as big as Indonesia has to, you know, throughout years, always have to be able to anticipate. So violence at the horizontal level is not something that, you know, occasional only. It may happen every now and then for various different reasons, given all the factors that I mentioned earlier. The fourth aspect, Indonesia is by nature, because of its history also, it's a bureaucratic patrimonial society. So if you expect any changes, you can expect changes will be piecemeal. Everything has to go through bureaucracy, and the bureaucracy is what keeps things stable, rule-based, and order, and respecting each other, because all those variations that I mentioned earlier. Patronage is also still strongly found across different groups in a society. So that has impact also on how the country is being run. Last but not least, given the situation that has been growing more and more global, Indonesia is one of those countries who desire to go global. So a lot of Indonesians are seeing itself as part of the world's citizens. If you look at this picture, this entire picture of domestic situation and desire inside of Indonesia, the key, the only thing that anyone in power in Indonesia can do when it comes to foreign policy is to formulate cooperation. Once we advance something that suggests tensions and conflicts, then you can imagine the consequences can actually have negative ramifications at home. So now let me move on to the situation inside of Indonesia, in particular economically. So if you notice that one of the things that challenged the world, and this has the impact as well inside of Indonesia, is this COVID-19 pandemic. On the normal situation, just at the early of 2020, the GDP per capita in Indonesia is at the range of 4,400 US dollars. And Indonesia, if you look at this graph, has basically been performing pretty well. Performing pretty well in terms of economic situation. The challenge is that the pandemic created, for the first time, an economic downturn after 2 decades of growth. Unemployment suddenly soared. The total unemployment across Indonesia is now at the 7.1% of the labor market. That's about 163 million people in the labor market. And then I think we should go beyond just being unemployed, because the pandemic also creates a new kinds of economy where people is forced to work part-times with reduced work hours, and they have to satisfy themselves working in the informal sectors, which means that uncertainty of income is really high. And why are these things important? Of course, it somehow affects how Indonesia shape its priority in terms of foreign policy. So theories about foreign policy basically look at either the products of foreign policy, and then you move backwards, checking out the inputs that contributes to the birth of certain foreign policy products, be it agreements, be it treaty, or some kinds of understanding and negotiation. But if I would like to draw closer attention to the process inside of foreign policy making in Indonesia. So the domestic content that I mentioned earlier is one component. And then as any other country that is located in a very strategic position would have to bear in mind, global context matters as well. And in Indonesia, because of the very strong bureaucratic patrimonial culture, the leadership factors also matter. So inside of Indonesia, you shouldn't think that it's only the diplomats who are doing the foreign policy or shaping foreign policy. There are many tracks for diplomacy. Some of us call it total football diplomacy. So the first track is the intergovernmental one. This is involving ministerial level officials. They can be at the bilateral level, regional level, multilateral level. And the second one is the innovative one. I call it innovative, but because I don't quite see this is being done by many countries. But I participated in many of the 1.5 track diplomacy, where they involve ministerial level, the career diplomats, and also people from different kind of strategic ministerial position to come and visit some countries, talk, while people like me, academics, civil society leaders, can also join and participate. And many kinds are being explored through this track. The third track is the second track diplomacy. That involves the B2B engagements, the NGO to NGO cooperation that is usually designed to go parallel with the first track. Indonesia is also a multi-party system. Many political parties matter in Indonesia. It doesn't matter big or small. Not many. No political party in Indonesia can go it alone, because nobody, not a single political party can run as a majority party in Indonesia. So even the small political party matter, and they always can negotiate what to get from the political processes. So the diplomacy by parliamentarians and diplomacy by political parties, also something that we have to be aware of. And I know for a fact, there are parliamentarians and political party leaders from Indonesia who has close relationship with colleagues in Pakistan. Indonesia is also a presidential system. The president is directly elected, and but it's on a split ticket. So the vice president and president can come from two different political parties. So how this materializes into foreign policy making? Well, it shapes styles and it shapes priority. And the composition of the member of the cabinet matters a lot as well in the implementation of foreign policy. We can always discuss about the impact of that, but let me now move on to the regional aspect of it. So Indonesia is one of the countries who believe that it alone cannot make, what do you call that? If it is alone, it's not going to have a big impact at the global level. And if the goal of Indonesia is to create peace, the more partners it has, the better. Regionalism is, as you can understand, is a way of thinking, is a mindset that you need to integrate somehow the interest of different kinds of nation states to achieve something bigger. And inside of Southeast Asia has been brewing this initiative, which is constituted as regionalism, and it's called ASEAN. And you know, from the birth, ASEAN has been very much facing very many kinds of challenges. Wait up. I have my apology for that. So Indonesia, just like any other countries in the region, has to face different kinds of competition between countries outside of the region. It has been a constant challenge for decades. We witnessed the Vietnam War. We witnessed confrontation between neighbors. We witnessed how a nation state could split because of the conflicts, internal conflicts. So when Indonesia participated in the formation of ASEAN, it was not an instant happiness. It was not an instant agreement that it will all turn into rosy future for Indonesia, let alone for the region. If you look at the history of ASEAN, you can see that basically it was some kind of experiment went into the negotiation as well. Let's just try some kind of format of cooperation between countries where we can express what we want to the bigger, major powers who obviously has a lot more resources than countries in Southeast Asia. And in doing so, you have to constantly demonstrate that there is commitment to contribute something and produce something that's can be considered a collaboration between countries in the region. And if you look at what I share here, I cannot. Here. Basically, in the case of ASEAN, you can see that the very first thing after Bangkok Declaration that has to be shown is that this region is interested in peace, and it's not interested in and something that can turn and create polarization in the region. ZOPFAN, the Zone of Peace, Freedom, and Neutrality, was first declared in 1971. And you know that in 1971, the Cold War is still very much active, and the Vietnam War was still ongoing. So the situation was quite dire. A lot of countries in the region is still basically at the lower slope of economic development. So it was nothing nice. And if you notice the document, ZOPFAN, it was very short document, and it specifically mentioned there was an informal meetings among foreign ministers of, at that time, still 5 member states of ASEAN, and it was not enough. Apparently, it was not considered serious enough. So you notice that a few years later, ASEAN tried to declare something that has more binding commitment, and that's called the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation. This is one of the treaties that was formed in 1974, when the Cold War is still very much raging, but it stays to today. And if you notice, a lot of statements of leaders in ASEAN often refer to this document, Treaty of Amity and Cooperation. And if you go through this treaty, you can notice the intention of founding fathers of ASEAN, which is to make sure that external countries have to respect the binding commitment, that amity, that friendship that is based on beyond just achieving certain immediate interests is strong in ASEAN. So I often look at this document and think that before it was elevated to allow for ascension of external countries, I think one of the things that ASEAN desired at that time is for recognition. And I know for a fact that Indonesia has been very strong advocate for making sure that this document is not just a show of commitment from the member state, but it's something that's recognized broadly by powers, external powers. And you notice that the commitment is elevated even more throughout the years. By 1976, that was immediately after the Vietnam War ended, ASEAN decided to elevate the decision-making process inside of ASEAN to involve not just foreign ministers, but head of governments. So 1976 was the time period where the first summit was conducted, and the Bali Concord I, which was the embryo of now what we see as the ASEAN community, and the blueprints and the ASEAN Vision and the ASEAN Charter, was first incepted in 1976. So and throughout in the global setting, you also notice that from 70s until 2000s, this was a time period where the economy booms, right? A lot of what do you call it, economic development aids come to the world, to the developing countries, come as an offering. You can do this so long as you do that. So ASEAN at that stage also needs to commit itself to members beyond just engaging and entertaining the requests from external powers. And I would like to highlight here, once again, the commitments of Indonesia to continue to drive ASEAN to remain true to the principle of openness, transparency in decision-making. So things, very comprehensive concept of security, from the military aspect of the security to the non-military ones, to the non-traditional security concepts such as human security, food security, transnational crime, is taken as a priority inside of ASEAN, and that's by establishing the IRF, the ASEAN Regional Forum, in 1994, followed by the Declaration of Southeast Asian Nuclear Weapon Free Zone in 1995. And a lot of documents since then focus a lot on social aspects, cultural aspects, also science, human rights aspects that basically is the consequences of the movement of the world into more what we call collaborative mode, yeah, after the Cold War ended. So these are just the same thing that I just mentioned. So the political security community in ASEAN basically aims at creating a rule-based community, very cohesive, peaceful, stable, and resilient region. I think what's interesting about this statement in the ASEAN Vision is that Indonesia is part of it, and the political security pillar inside of ASEAN is very much the Indonesian baby. So the economic aspect, as you can imagine, was championed by member states who are very much interested in advancing economic developments mostly. But Indonesia is one of the countries who truly believe that a country cannot live on bread alone, on food alone, on development alone. Somehow the stability, the cooperation at the political security level is key for cooperation. And once again, the key here is the peace. Without peace in the region, the economic development alone will stand void. And you notice the three pillars of ASEAN political security community are these three. And very critical in this is the belief that ASEAN needs to be central. When it says central, it means that ASEAN needs to be in the driving force. Any kinds of engagement with external countries need to follow the ASEAN mode of communication, style, rule, and the ASEAN community is very much the document that member states continue to refer to in engagement. Now, how successful is this? Maybe I should go there. One of the things that any regional cooperation, so foreign is crisis, right? Lots and lots of crisis has to be experienced in order to show the resilience of regional cooperation and also the spirit that's going to be advancing foreign policy. And you notice that inside of Indonesia, change has been fundamental since 1998. It was the time period where Indonesia had democratic reform, started by student movements who wanted to end corruption, nepotism, and pollution done by the authoritarian leader Suharto back then. And since that time, people start to realize that they are sick of being oppressed, of being afraid to those in power, to the tyrants, to being set aside, marginalized because of being nobody among the political dynasties. So that also trickled down to the principle of foreign policy, not only in Indonesia, but also in ASEAN. So if you notice documents in ASEAN, very much reflect this spirit of democracy, human rights, anti-corruption, science, devolution of power, very much reflect how Indonesia have evolved throughout the years. So the emphasis given this very quite traumatic experience of democratic reform process is that cooperation is really key for Indonesia. And for the first time in the history since 1998, before 1998 under Suharto, Indonesia has very close relationship with the US. But given the corruption that was so big during the New Order period under Suharto, lots of Indonesia suffer from debt, big debt, and to go out from that debt and the deep crisis following the 97-98 financial crisis, Indonesia decided to stand up vis-a-vis the US. Indonesia decided to go out to end the debt from the IMF. So there was a massive demonstrations and desire for Indonesia to stand on its own, show itself it can be truly independent of any foreign pressures, including those who try to shackle you through debt. So I think it's a very important time in the history that shows that from now on, if you see Indonesia can be quite strong to any countries trying to tie Indonesia to any debt, that's one of the reasons why. So what Indonesia can tolerate is platforms of cooperation. So it doesn't want to tie itself to just one model, to just one country. Instead, it wants to proliferate options. And it does it through ASEAN, one of the things Indonesia do. So you notice that a lot of these framework of cooperations, which in some literature, they call it the noodle bowl of Asia, lots and lots of cooperation framework inside of Asia, is actually centered or has ASEAN in the center. And that's also one of the things that Indonesia advanced. Indonesia is at the heart of this initiative. So it wants to enlarge the circle of cooperation without losing itself. And it doesn't have to bear the burden alone. So it somehow pulled together the resources from ASEAN member states to outreach to. So if you notice further, a lot of the initiatives that Indonesia have advanced at the regional as well as the global levels through the UN, for instance, the United Nations, you notice it's a step by step, but it's very clear. Indonesia doesn't want to close itself, to close options for itself in terms of peace. It wants to, as much as possible, lock peace through doing lots and lots of cooperation through different kinds of platforms, but ASEAN is the center. So Indonesia rely a lot on ASEAN, and on its own, it goes through the UN. If you look deeper also into the documents of ASEAN principles and the UN principle is very much aligned. ASEAN started off as a very informal engagements among countries located in Southeast Asia, but it used the principles, the frameworks, even mimicking the mechanism of the UN and brought it to Southeast Asia. So it's, I think, compared to other cooperation, regional cooperation, this one is very much in support of the UN mechanism. So let me now move on to the challenge, however. So that was basically the picture until, 2008 probably, where things are still running relatively business as usual, as expected. It's quite peaceful. But you notice that since then, the early 2000s, basically, the world has undergone very rapid change, which a lot of people have seen this as nothing but positive. But if you look closer, especially as time has passes by, these also has negative ramifications at the political security dimension. So cheaper, easier mobility of people, for instance, on its own looking good. But when people are mobile and they go to different places that they never know, that they are not aware of the consequences, they may be exposed to extremism, to ideology of terrorism, and they may be attracted to it. Mobility of people, the fact that Indonesia has many sea lanes of communications have exposed areas that are newly opened through the infrastructure developments across the world to illegal activities. Human trafficking, I led this initiative back in the ASEAN Human Rights Commission, 2016-2018, to combat trafficking in person. And we noticed clearly how very difficult it is to combat this crime under a very mobile society. And not only it's much easier, it's much cheaper as well. Even the poor have access to connect to the rest of the world. Plus minuses, of that. People get recruited and fooled by fake recruitment through Facebook, through people approaching through WhatsApp messages, cell phones. Children get fooled. They do pornography because of the cell phone that they have access to. So cheaper and easier mobility of people has consequences to people suffering from uneven structural problems across the country as big as Indonesia. New routes for connectivity in commerce, yeah, it's good, but many kinds of violations also occur. And with new openings, you are, but of course, can't experience this. I believe you also have very big number of population. New opening means new difficulty to monitor. Third thing is opportunity for investment. A lot of people say it's very good thing. People say it's very good thing to have investment coming to a country. Well, guess what? Investment only comes to country that not only open for opening factories and sell opening factories and hiring people, but also to sell. So investment opportunity has precondition that you have to somehow open your market to the products that is going to be produced through the investment. So there's a race to the bottom as a consequence of this to the labor cost. And a lot of people didn't realize it until they find out that industrialization is a very tough thing to do under a very open market for investment. I also mentioned here the too big to fail mindset of treating businesses. So a lot of instances, big businesses, especially those from abroad, is seen as such a big opportunity that if you punish them for whatever violation they do, it will suffer all the people who are recruited, employed by that company. Thus, violations that happen, any kinds of violations that become, unseen. It's considered tolerable. So impunity of violations happen. Last, cheaper products. And I see this as very much challenging, especially for the future generation, those who are standing much farther from the history of everything that Indonesia have experienced in the past, the bad impact of imperialism, the bad impact of conflicts, horizontal conflicts, insurgencies in the past. The newer generation is the generation of internet, the generation of access to education, having secured schooling years. They all they care about is that they have options for products, and they barely look at how the products is being produced. They just weigh based on the the pricing or the style, the trend of the group. Any countries in the world, I think this also valid for other countries, must be aware of how import consumption, we are enticed to keep buying products from certain economies out there without thinking that the consequence will be our banks, the exchange reserves, yeah. And I try to compare this with other countries located, not in Southeast Asia, but elsewhere. And I noticed that the future of activities are still here in Southeast Asia. And the movements of goods and services is very much still here. And if I look at the map of biodiversity of the world, the forest, the animals, the water, this has implications also to water stocks and minerals, still very much located in very particular part of the world. So the world, so the sources of food, the resources of energy, the sources of water for the world is very much located in areas that are very much like Indonesia. So I gather all of this to argue that it's very much inevitable that one of the things that we have to consider, and I think with Pakistan we can think together on how best we can synergize in avoiding the worst from this ramifications impact of global trending, is that resources would continue to dwindle for the world. And the fact that Southeast Asia is rich in all those resources, and Indonesia is at the crossroad of it, so we are at the in the middle of the people passing by to get those resources, makes it very critical that we take actions in terms of foreign policy to secure all those resources. The foreign policy plans of major powers is very much getting clear and clear. Yeah, all they want is just access to these resources, and as much as possible, exploit it, bring it for the improvement of wealth at their home nations. The mindset of we first is very strong nowadays. So competition among major powers in the land, in the waters, that is actually the land of peace, is something that we have to be concerned about. And this has divided nations. A lot of the, I'll give you the example of some of the things that already starting dividing nations in Southeast Asia, and this should be of concern as well to other parts of the world, is violence. Violence at the horizontal level follows this construction of Indo-Pacific region. The conception of the region that one think would lead to greater prosperity, I now see this, more as something that we have to be aware of. I think back in 2016, I wrote something on the newspaper about how we should be aware of this concept. But at that time, I was a weirdo saying that, because people were still so hopeful that this conception of Indo-Pacific will turn just anything into much better than what already is. But now people start to realize that after a while, especially after the pandemic, you would start seeing how aggressive countries can be to secure resources that are limited in numbers. And in the Pacific, as a conception is created to somehow engagements between countries. But the challenge here is that all the countries in that region is very much inward looking and having the me first mindset. And so are the countries who are outside of the region and want to exploit from the region. The consequences of that is growing unilateralism. If you cannot trust each other, then you start going on your own. I don't have the picture here because I'm not quite, an expert in the proliferation of arms. But one of the things I gathered from my colleagues who monitored the activities of terrorist activities in the region, the size of arms market in the region has also expanded. So we cannot just look at, a new creation of a concept and expect it's only about, commodities such as shoes and clothes and, just harmless stuff. There are also other kinds of commodities being sold and proliferated as rich and peaceful as Indo-Pacific. So I think in the next 5 to 10 years is a very critical time, not only for countries in the region in Southeast Asia, such as Indonesia, but also in the broader scale, like in South Asia, as Pakistan. This is a very critical time period to decide whether we are going to continue having peace or the peace is going to be eroded by conflicts and war. Technology may have positive impacts, but it also has eroded the ability of some countries to protect its sovereignty. The fact of the matter is the growth of economic development across the world may have increased in the 90s and 2000s, but the challenge is the distribution of those wealth is very much uneven, and the pandemic has accelerated the uneven distribution of that resources. So one of the things that concern me most currently is the situation in Myanmar. Myanmar is one of the places that I think is a sign that a region that has successfully maintained peace for the past 50 years or so under ASEAN can actually turn into something else because we failed to prevent the worsening impact of conflicts inside of Myanmar. Why I say so? Because I don't see this as merely a domestic problem. Myanmar is an example how international solidarity is growing really low lately. And despite the fact that people are killing each other and there's a zero-sum game happening inside of Myanmar, civilians, including babies, children, are killed, and people can rage on the street just shooting people, but nothing is being done about it. Response from international is very minimal. I say very minimal because it doesn't change much in terms of protecting the civilians. And what do we do about it? We continue to try to persuade countries to come to the negotiation table, but those who are directly involved in this spiraling violence continue to dwell in violence. So I'm among those who believe that, you know, the spread of violence can trigger more violence elsewhere. It's sort of like an example of if you tolerate violence and you still recognize those in power and run the violence, then yeah, the same thing may happen elsewhere. So the countries that are involved is not just Myanmar here. There are many countries who have invested in Myanmar, and a lot of them are actually ASEAN member states. They have difficulty trying to digest what is going on. I'm saying this in a very positive note, taking the assumption that they have the intent to maintain peace. But of course, the downturn of that is if they're not, then we are really in serious problem. But I guess that's the introduction of not only Indonesia, but also the region. I'm open to discussion. Let's now discuss. What do you think you know, is needing more attention nowadays in terms of political security cooperation? Back to you, Pawasha. Thank you very much.
Dinna, for your very comprehensive presentation. We will now be moving on to our interactive session where our participants will be given chance to interact with you directly. So as requested earlier, all those who have any questions for our professor, our guest speaker here, you may raise your hand. I will unmute you and you can ask your question. Okay. So first we have a question from Muhammad Ramzan. I am unmuting you. You can please ask the question.
Am I audible, Ji?
Yes, you're audible.
Thank you very much. Thank you, ma'am, for giving a comprehensive details and lectures on the foreign policy. Actually, I'm interested to know about the foreign policy formulation process in Indonesia. We see that the president and vice president are directly elected, and we also know that there's the House of Representatives. So what is the role of House of Representatives in giving its input for foreign policy formulation, and how much extent it is considered or it is given weightage by the president who is directly elected, and also having a cabinet which is actually not directed, those are selected people. So what is, I mean, kind of cooperation and mechanism in foreign policy formulation and giving the proposals so that whenever any challenge comes to the government in terms of foreign policy and how they deal with it? And similarly, if you allow me to ask another question with it, that you have talked about the negative ramification, then the opening of society is creating negative ramifications. And whenever we, and you know well, whenever we are opening a society where we are bringing modernity in any society, we must be aware of the negative consequences of it. So this is the question of, I mean, governance. When we are not aware of the the governance problems and how to govern when we are opening a society, and we are not taking care of negative ramifications, then I think this will going to happen again and again. So I think there is a kind of a weak, this is a weak area, particularly in developing countries, not to focus on governance, and instead of giving opening society very for everybody as per democratic norms. Thank you very much.
Are we collecting questions first, Pawasya?
It's up to you, Professor Dinna. If you want to have more questions first before you answer this one, we can do that. Or if you want to answer one by one.
Okay, maybe one more from the second question.
Okay, so we have another question from Ariba. Ariba, I am unmuting you. You can ask a question.
Yes, first of all, Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon. And I would like to say thank you for such a wonderful presentation. I have some questions that in 2017, a poll conducted in Indonesia that some Indonesian respondents named China as the country that poses the biggest threat to Indonesia. So my question is that, is China an economic threat to Indonesia? And my other question is that, as we know that Indonesia had faced many challenges like economic vulnerability or decentralization. So what are the new threats to Indonesian security? And my last question is that, is US helping, United States of America is helping to overcome these problems? Thank you.
Okay, so I guess it's let me start with the first question from Mr. Ramzan. So Indonesia, given its nature as a very diverse country, the fact that there are multi-party system is something that nobody who are ever in power can escape from. They cannot, none of them have successfully achieve or commit to certain priority in a very constant direction. You constantly have to negotiate along the way to achieve and fulfill that priority. By nature, it's quite hard to imagine a long-term project. So what has been the practice inside of Indonesia is that communication across political parties is very critical. So foreign policy has many tracks, as I mentioned. At the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the one that our ambassadors are engaged in and our foreign ministers are engaged in, is only one part of the story. They represent the face of the country, the rule that in terms of hiring of diplomats, and also how they gain accreditation as ambassador and things like that. But who will be placed as ambassador in which country, for instance, it's also part of the negotiation with political parties and those in parliament. That's one fact, one of the reality, how powerful can be the negotiation between vice president, president, and the parliament and political party leaders on who should represent Indonesia on foreign affairs. And I start with that because sometimes it's not just about the grand strategy, like, you know, white paper of Indonesia, for instance. The white paper of Indonesia may be produced by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in collaboration with other strategic ministry. But what matters a lot is how you interpret what is written in the document. And the role of parliament and the political party leaders is quite interesting in that interpretation. So if you understand Indonesia's, I don't know if this is the practice also in Pakistan. Maybe in return, I would like to hear how Pakistan is hiring their diplomats and also ambassadors, because in the case of Indonesia, certain countries can be strategically important if you look at the people who are selected there to be in the top rank position. The second thing is about budget. Because foreign policy formulation also related to appropriation of budget, and this has dynamic as well in the parliament. For instance, on the issues of migrant workers, or the relationship with whether or not Indonesia will open relationship with Israel, or how should we treat response to Israel, or how we respond to developments affecting Palestine, given the foreign policy of the United States, for instance. That goes directly somehow awakening political party people in the parliament. It's like everybody suddenly participate in dialogue about it and becomes media dialogue, polemics, if you wish. Some issues, they just go under radar, but some issues can be quite hotspot, because the parliament think they have direct interest in it, and the budget also matters there. Second question about governance problem. You're right. Developing countries has little room to adjust its governance method to their hard content. They don't have enough, not enough resources, and to some degree also not enough room to maneuver. Yeah, a lot of this governance issue, you assume that it's a sovereignty of a nation, but you notice that along with openings of cooperation, technical cooperation even, usually they come with the requirement to have certain model of governance, governing the project at least. And very little room sometimes is given to innovate, to adjust, to custom to the conditions on the ground. And this is also something that developing countries has to deal with. So projects, if you notice, back in 2000, I think 2014, 2013, I did a research trying to identify where foreign aid falls upon on the issues of social protection. And you notice that it keeps going into the same province and same cities. Those who literally relatively easy to monitor, to show, that there's progress, there is success. The challenge with governance is that there is uneven structural problems, right, across the difficult areas and the less difficult areas. So unless you also invest your time and resources to explore how you deal with the difficult areas, then the model of governance will only continue benefiting the already established areas, the already working areas. I guess that's an ongoing problem that developing countries has to face. And then China as a threat. Actually, it's more of an uneven, what do you call it? Uneven mania on China. True, some of Indonesia see China as a potential threat, but there are also especially business people who see China more as an opportunity. You have to ride on the dragon, basically. If you see a dragon, you don't try to kill them because you may get killed, but you ride on it to benefit from it. So there are those who with that kind of belief, and it's the mixed picture of China is also witnessed among decision makers at the parliament, political parties, also within the bureaucracy, the ministries. You see this diversity. China, in terms of science, for instance, it's not being seen as something harmful. But in terms of China products, now people start seeing it as potentially challenging. But interestingly, for e-commerce, for instance, it's still not seen as a threat. So I guess we need to look closer as how rich this, how nuanced this perspective towards certain country can be for regular citizens. USA, in terms of USA after Donald Trump, I think changed a lot in terms of its foreign engagement, and I don't think it will ever come back to where it was. Its pattern of global engagement will continue to change. I think the way we expect the US to get involved in stopping violence, in stopping or preventing war, cannot be as how it used to be. The US doesn't have the resources that it used to have, and the willingness to do it beyond what the pattern that Donald Trump has put forward during his time period. You see that Biden, as much as he said he is pro-peace, he is not pulling back from the capital of pulling back is embassy from Jerusalem, right? And it's not pulling back also the changing the relationship back to the Arab countries. It doesn't change anything also in the region necessarily after the Trump decided to show transactional method of foreign policy with its allies. We don't see anything change since then. So I don't think basically the world needs to think beyond the US at this point to balance China. It's a reality that we have to face. And in terms of decentralization can be a threat. Well, I would rather see it more as a challenge rather than a threat to move quickly, to be agile, because in Indonesia, decentralization, devolution of power is not to the provincial level, which there are 34 provinces in Indonesia, provinces. Devolution of power in Indonesia is to districts level, and there are 512 districts. All of these district leaders are directly elected by people residing in that area. So they also have autonomous decisions on budgets, on like domestic projects such as healthcare, investment projects such as building factories, or opening job applications, that this and that. They have lots of autonomy that the national government cannot quite interfere in. So to the case of Indonesia, I'm among those who see somehow it complicates, but it also has the potential to support the limited budget that the central government has to bear. I cannot imagine Indonesia now going back to the centralized model where everything has to be solved by the central government. No capacity, no resources. But if we allow all this different people help think to solve local problems, then and they can do it well. Now that's solution to many problems, daily problems of citizens. And the key here is to make sure that there are good communications between those in the central government and those at the local governments in terms of what kind of projects can be developed, what kind of cooperation with foreign countries can be developed to support their initiatives, for instance. But yeah, I don't see that much of a threat. Centralization is more of a challenge to manage. I hope that answers. We can open another rounds of discussion. And please, if any of you want to share about Pakistan, the opposite or the aspects that I explained, do you see anything different? Anything
I think there's some connectivity issue at your end because we cannot understand.
Compared to Indonesia, it's unstable. Share your thoughts if context. Please say so. I'm not an expert on Pakistan politics. I only have Pakistani friends, but in terms of Pakistan politics, I only read from books. So you can share your thoughts so to enrich my
Okay, so
my knowledge as well.
If any of our participants, they have anything to add to what Professor Dinna has just shared with us, you're welcome to raise your hand and I will unmute you. And but before we get any comments from our participants, yes, okay, Said Akhtar wants to add something, I think. But before we move on to Said Akhtar, Professor Dinna, I have a question for you, if you can kindly elaborate this. Now, keeping in mind, considering the present, changing geopolitical situation right now, how do you think ASEAN can be made more relevant for Indonesia?
Okay, thank you, Pawasha. There's one more raising hand.
That's Said Akhtar. I can unmute him, and if he has a question or if he wants to add to what you have already mentioned, Said, you can go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, Miss Doctor.
Yeah.
I have a question. There is a principle, your state ideology that your very first president of Indonesia, Soekarno, had given in 1945. That is Pancasila, like that pronunciation, Pancasila. So yes, ma'am. Thank you. So question is, in your first very passage in your lecture, you had discussed the people cannot be made uniform. But in your state principle, there is mentioned diversity in unity. But here you explained that the people cannot be made uniform. What is this discrepancy in this your state principle and this your sentence? So second question is, ma'am, you have discussed that you have adopted immensely the principles of the United Nations in the form of ASEAN's principles. Ma'am, question is, Myanmar, in your last passage, you illustrated the democratic government was overthrown by the military coup. So question is, you have not any strict rule that ASEAN members can utilize to punish Myanmar. Please kindly explain it and answer. These are my two questions. Thank you very much.
Can you repeat the last one about the Myanmar? What
Yes,
cannot be done by ASEAN? Sorry.
I asked, as I said, as you have said that you had adopted immensely many principles of the United Nations type for the ASEAN members. Ma'am, well understood what I said. So my question is, there was overthrown the democratic government in Myanmar. So Myanmar is a part of ASEAN as a member. So my question is, there is not any strict rule to utilize to punish Myanmar in this matter that the government was overthrown by the military.
Okay, to punish. Okay, Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. First, a question from Pawasha, in terms of changing geopolitics, and what can be done about it. Yeah. Is it through ASEAN or Indonesia?
The changing in this present changing geopolitical situation, how can we make ASEAN more relevant for Indonesia?
Okay.
Yes.
That's a $1 million question, actually. Everybody inside of ASEAN have continuously spoken about the importance of making ASEAN relevant. And as I described in the beginning, it's the constant struggle of ASEAN. This is an organization, engagement platforms of country that is so diverse in interest, in system, in backgrounds, in historical backgrounds, as well as their expectation, to create something that can be seen as productive and valid as needed by the context of the newest context, the contemporary context. So the way ASEAN works, let me recall what ASEAN Way means. ASEAN Way means that whenever there are challenges that are roaming in the area and also at the global levels, ASEAN first and foremost must come to the table informally and discuss among themselves, what do you think we should do, basically. So it always refuses the what do you call it, the signal or any sense that an idea is only coming from certain country, and certainly it will always refuse the idea coming from non-member states. Now that I also truly understand, being inside of ASEAN for several years, I notice it can be very challenging to justify that your idea of being relevant may be understood differently by member states. But what do you call it? The changing geopolitics today is, I think, much more challenging than what ASEAN has undergone in the past years. In the past, it's much clearer, the line between not cooperative and cooperative is much easier to draw. Whereas now, because of the growing interdependence and the fact that any disruption to economic activities would create either unemployment, either dissatisfaction at the electoral process inside of any member states, countries that are democratic, and for those who are authoritarian in its nature, ASEAN member states, some of them are authoritarian regimes. They also cannot tolerate not producing something that they can justify as legitimate outcome of engagement in ASEAN. So all these factors, are complicating things. If I can say my own view of how to make ASEAN relevant is to change the way ASEAN make decisions. It doesn't have to be constant 10 member states agreeing on something if the outcome is, or if the consequence is disruption to peace. And I think one of the things that ASEAN has exercised before is ASEAN minus X. So a decision about economic cooperation and trade may happen without the consensus of all 10, but those who are ready to move forward and they have like-minded position on something, and it's already assessed as has what do you call it, less negative consequences to the rest, they can move on with it, and then the rest can bandwagon afterwards. The same principle should be used in the situation of today, where peace is the stake. And but I think it's still very hard to munch, yeah, by a lot of the leaders in the region. They still see that basically the peace in the region depends a lot on the competence, on the capacity of every member state. And as you see from the case in Myanmar, we are actually very vulnerable given the economic interdependence, the logic of governance and competence of a country needs to be revised somehow. You know, so I think it's still unfinished process at this point to make ASEAN more relevant. And in the case of Myanmar, for instance, you can see how difficult it is, yeah, to make decisions beyond the typical process of sitting together 10 member states, and especially when the Myanmar side, the one who keep coming is still the military force. So yeah, that's a very good question that unfortunately it's still ongoing. We don't know how things will turn out, but ASEAN needs to innovate in terms of its mechanism. And then in terms of Pancasila, the word unity and uniform is different. Uniform means that you are trying to make everybody think the same and feels the same and act towards something in the same way. Whereas unity is that means that you are, regardless of differences of opinions and something, you know that you have to unite, you have to work together to achieve something. So unity in diversity means you are committed to always keeping Indonesian together under diversity. So you don't force others to think the way you think. So we can still live harmoniously and achieve something even if we think differently. One of the things to do so is to take turns, right? This time, when this political party lead, then we follow their priority. And this political party cannot just consider its own goal and motive and priority. They have to negotiate. That's one of the things that becomes the concrete example of how unity works. Or, for instance, at the very practical level in Indonesia, in terms of regulations to, what do you call that? Regulations to, maybe to domestic, yeah, I'm trying to think of an example. Language, we are united by Bahasa Indonesia, our national language. Our national language can be less understood by some ethnic groups. Some ethnic groups like Javanese and more of the larger ethnic groups may be more familiar with some of the words that's being used in Bahasa Indonesia. But for some other ethnicities, it's totally different. They have to learn from scratch Bahasa Indonesia. But with this Bahasa, people don't need to leave behind their identity, their mark of what they've learned by birth, yeah, their custom, their tradition, ethnically or in terms of religion. They don't have to change that. But for communication, for the sense of Indonesia is one, we use this language. So I hope you understand the difference between uniform and unity. And then the second one, UN principle in ASEAN. ASEAN is not designed to punish. to punish anybody, not let alone member states. So the idea of ASEAN is to create peace and to propel economic development, prosperity. That was the very intent of having ASEAN in the first place. So if you notice, of all the issues that have come onto ASEAN table, the spirit is to collaborate, to provide mutual assistance, to provide, to chip in resources. So other countries, external parties, they call it dialogue partners, if they want to do something about the region, they have to speak out in forums that ASEAN designed, ASEAN +1, ASEAN +3, ASEAN East Asian Summit, or IRF. They have different kinds of names for that, and with different particularity of issue to discuss. But none of them, if you notice, it's about punishing anybody. If you see any tendency of member states or external powers trying to impose something and force something, doing something violent in the region, you notice the mechanism is to deter them from doing so. We continue talking it out to remind them that you are here, you follow our rules. You are here, you follow our rules. So you notice the dialogue about South China Sea, for instance, that many other countries have give up negotiating with China. They throw it to ASEAN because ASEAN has the agility, the ability to continue talking about it, despite China continue to say no about it. But it's not punishing China. It's not trying to exclude China from engagement with ASEAN either. But it's trying to keep making noises and saying that you are not allowed to do this, you're not allowed to do this, you have to consider our position, and it's only on the table. So don't bring it outside and make war out of it. So yeah, in terms of Myanmar, as I said again, Myanmar as a member state requires a different mechanism, which at this point ASEAN has not come into an agreement about. If something as serious as this happen among member states, which I think needs to be handled creatively by ASEAN to show that ASEAN do care about human rights, do care about civilians, protecting civilians, then the mechanism of 10 member states agreeing on something doesn't apply to this. That's my view. But of course, the higher levels, politicians need to decide on this and agree on this. Any other?
Thank you, Professor Dinna, for your expert analysis. And that was the last question for our today's session. And now at the end, I would like to invite His Excellency Adam Tokyo, Ambassador of the Republic of Indonesia to Pakistan, for closing remarks.
Well, thank you, Parwas. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much, Ibu Dinna, for this very comprehensive and extensive elaborations of the Indonesian foreign policies and the, the regionalisms and how the spaghetti balls of infrastructures of the ASEAN also affect the collaborations among countries in the region. So I really enjoyed listening to your presentations, Ibu, and got a lot of information also regarding the challenges that encountered by the ASEANs. Now, let me also add some views regarding the readings materials, because last times when we have these discussions, many participants also post questions on the books relating to the ASEANs that need to be finds also. So in this regard, I I can suggest several. Ibu also can can add more books, relevant book. One book written by Kishore Mahbubani, The Miracles of ASEAN, which was published a couple of years ago, which I think provide an insight how ASEAN first established on the backgrounds of the conflict of member states in Indonesia and Malaysia. At that time, we just finished the conflict of in 1965, Malaysia and Philippines also with regard to the Sabah issues, even Philippines and other countries. So I think that's good to provide a background of ASEAN to the participant of this discussion. The second books, which also very relevant, written by former Indonesian Foreign Minister Martina Talagawa, Does ASEAN Matter? A View from Within. This is also a very interesting piece of stories whereby Marty is being a former Indonesian Foreign Minister. He can, he speaks based on his own experience on how ASEAN deal with several issues and the challenges for the ASEAN, and I think that was two books which is very relevant for today's discussions. And thirdly, another website whereby you can find, the participant can find numerous short articles or long articles about the ASEAN. Please Google the ISEAS Yusuf Ishak Institute, ISEAS Yusuf Ishak Institute, which actually in Singapore, or if I'm not mistaken. Those are very relevant source of articles or book about ASEAN, whereby the participants can Google and find relevant articles. So once again, on behalf of the participants, Ibu, and also the embassy and the CGSS, I would like to extend appreciations to Ibu to allowing your spare time to discuss about the Indonesian foreign policy and regionalism. Thank you very much once again, Ibu.
Thank you, Bapak.
Thank you, Excellency, for the names of the books. Now, with that, we will be concluding our today's session. At the end of the session, I would especially like to thank our guest speaker for today, Professor Dinna, who took out time and who joined us today and shared a very comprehensive and very well explained presentation, and to His Excellency for joining us, and to all the participants who joined us today. Thank you all, and Hafiz.
Thank you. Have a great day. Thank you, Excellency.
Thank you, Ibu. See you later at the other occasions.
Okay, bye-bye. I'm leaving now.